So welcome to the month of December. Our global theme this month is celebrating divine truth. So this month we're going to be exploring a variety of topics as we celebrate the idea that all religions, all spiritual teachings seem to point in a common direction, an inner and an outer experience of love and light. So one of the common themes that runs through almost all teachings is this concept that human beings are having an ongoing relationship with darkness and with light. So ages ago, people discovered that if they could manage their relationship with darkness and light, then life would be much better. Crops would grow better, animals would be healthier, people would survive winter months better. The concepts of time and calendars just help life run more smoothly. So there was always this relationship with darkness and light. And winter and summer solstice are these special times of year when darkness and light are celebrated as we mark the longest and the shortest amounts of lightness and darkness. And almost all major religions celebrate a holiday this month that has to do with our relationship with light. And we as individuals, we have an external relationship with darkness and light in the world around us, but we have an internal relationship with darkness and light. And this is just a part of the divine truth. We are evolving toward the light within us as we heal and as we grow and as we evolve. So today, I want to talk about shadows. My talk title is Just Me and My Shadow. Do y'all remember that song? I think it was Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra, perhaps? Maybe? Is that right? That sang Me and My Shadow. And I thought I'd have Derek sing it, but it really doesn't match the message really well. But it's a cute song. But so let's talk about shadows. So in reality, a shadow is the projected image of a blocked light source, right? And in a kind of in a more abstract way, a shadow is the darkness that results from the absence of light. And although a shadow is dark, it's created by light and it's revealed by light. So let's talk about that. So one of the classic stories of childhood is the story of Peter Pan, the boy who never wanted to grow up. And there have been so many depictions and stage productions. I'm sure you've seen a few, Bill. So many stage productions and depictions of the story, and just about as many interpretations about it. And I won't get into interpreting the entire story. Maybe another time I'll do a whole talk on Peter Pan. But today I want to talk about one aspect of it, and that's the story's theme of light and dark. And when I went online to read more about the shadow of Peter Pan, I just want you to know that people write their entire doctoral dissertations about how Barry uses the shadow in Peter Pan. It's fascinating stuff, but just let me condense it to just make a point. You may remember in the story, or you may not, but in the story, Peter Pan loses his shadow. And the shadow becomes a symbol of growing up out of childhood into the complexities of adulthood, being an adult. So Peter Pan needed his shadow to experience both happiness and sadness, which are both kind of important elements in having a complete experience of life. And in some versions of the story, Wendy reattaches the shadow of Peter Pan by sewing it on him, and she connects him back to a more fullness of life when he returns from Neverland. So shadows are fascinating, aren't they? Especially to young children. They almost seem to have a life of their own, don't they? And children will play with them, and then all of a sudden we grow up and realize that exactly what they are. So in the depictions of Peter Pan, the children are also fascinated by the shadows, especially when they do seem to have a life of their own in the fantasy tale. So as I said, shadow is darkness created by light. So in the story of Peter Pan, the shadow symbolizes sadness and ignorance and fear and challenge, right? When the light symbolizes happiness and knowledge and love and joy. And we all know that life contains all of that. Life contains all of those elements of darkness and lightness. But as a child not wanting to grow up, Peter Pan only wanted to be happy and playful and innocent, the incomplete world of a child. So he didn't have his shadow. He only had light as a companion. Now remember, in Peter Pan, the light was symbolized as Tinkerbell, that impish little playful fairy, sprinkling fairy dust all over everything. That was kind of Tinkerbell's role. So when my daughter was really young, we took her to see a stage version of Peter Pan, and Tinkerbell was depicted on stage as just a little light that just twinkled here and there, and it would move about the set and interact with the live characters. And after that play, Kelsey just found her shadow to be fascinating, and she would try to step on it and trap it, and then she was also fascinated by spots of light. You know how when you're in your car and your cell phone will catch a reflection, or your jewelry or something, and there'll be lights in the car, and she would see that reflection of light, and she'd say, "Mommy, it's Tink. It's Tink." And I'm like, "What is she seeing?" I'm a little worried about her. But it was wonderfully innocent to watch her learn about darkness and light through the symbolism in Peter Pan. So why do I want to talk about shadows today? We all have a shadow. We're all created in the completeness of God. And contained within the divine is the light and the shadow. Most of us like to think that other people are only witnessing our best and highest selves. And as spiritual seekers, we try to move about the world being light beings and showing up as love in every situation. But the deeper truth is we all have shadow selves. And our shadows are very much a part of our egoic nature. Now, the science of mind teaches perfection. It teaches that perfection is the truth, that perfect God, perfect man or woman, perfect being. And it teaches that behind everything on the physical level, there is a pattern of perfection. And I get that. I really get that. But that is why I asked Derek to sing that song, to remind us that we are perfect and we are golden. But I also understand that on the human level, on the ego personality level, on the physical level, things show up way less than perfect. So I think it's a matter of how do we use that word, perfect. So on that ego personality level, we all have a shadow. Our shadows are created and expressed when we block the light of our true nature with our human stuff. So Carl Jung, he defined the shadow very clearly as that what a human being would not want to be. That's what he called the shadow when he was doing his work. And what he meant is that the shadow is the negative side of the personality. He writes it's the sum of all unpleasant properties or traits that a person wants to hide. The inferior, worthless, unworthy, and primitive side of human nature, one's own second personality, our own dark side. That's all Carl Jung's words. The human shadow is any aspect of a person that is not exposed to the light of consciousness or the light of awareness. So as I said, every person has a shadow. The shadow that makes us human and adult and complicated, right? Our important work becomes learning about our shadow and understanding it, because the less the shadow is incorporated in the consciousness of human life, the darker and denser it gets. So when we're in our highest consciousness, we're aware of the light that is being blocked to create the shadow. But in order to express that light into our lives and into the situations that we find ourselves in, we have to heal the stuff that's between us and the light that's casting our shadow. See, our egos are attached. Our egos are attached to limiting thoughts. Thoughts of separateness, thoughts that we are victims, thoughts that we are broken or damaged, thoughts that we are less than other people. And these thoughts, when we leave them unchecked, they become thicker and more dense, and they block the inner light to create our shadow selves. So our shadow selves are a part of us that are angry and fearful and defensive and blaming of others. And they're the parts of us that are not healed, and they're shaming and accusatory. Our shadows push other people away with mistrust, and our shadows can be hurtful, and sometimes, quite frankly, they can be dead. And some people live full time in their shadow selves, living in relationship to the world and all other people from this place of unworthiness. And we all know people who experience life that way. Most of us try to distance ourselves from them because it can be pretty unpleasant to be around, right? And that sometimes they can be just kind of downright scary. But these kind of people are rare, actually. More often than not, we show our shadow selves occasionally. We tend to show our shadow selves, that's hard to say, when we are frightened or triggered into feelings of unworthiness or anger, and we feel the need to defend ourselves. That's when we get into our shadow. So how do we work with this truth about ourselves? How do we work with it? Awareness. Awareness is the key to healing. A person who is aware of their shadow, their sense of inferiority or unworthiness, and the reaction to those feelings has the opportunity to heal and correct it. A person who is not aware of their inner shadow can be stuck and get stuck in its expression because they're denying that they have a darker side. And without awareness, your shadow can be triggered by circumstances and situations that's kind of making everyone around you miserable. And here's another thing we do. When we're not aware, without awareness, it's very likely that we will project our shadow onto someone else. And what that means is that we might feel miserable inside of ourselves, and we believe that someone else is causing the pain. Projection can be so strong that we believe that someone else is angry when we're actually the ones that are feeling angry. You know, we can actually believe that some characteristic or opinion or reaction we are having is coming from someone else. That's projecting your shadow onto somebody else. And once you're aware that you have this shadow aspect, it's an opportunity to work with it consciously. It's an opportunity to embrace it and to integrate that aspect into your life. So I want to talk about some work that Dr. Jacob Lieberman has done. He's a physician and an author who's been studying the concepts of light and consciousness and spirituality for over 40 years. And he's written several books on the subject. And he says this: what we call our shadow is nothing more than an aspect of our nature waiting to be embraced and reclaimed. And if we look at this metaphysically, we can ask the question, when does the shadow disappear? When does the shadow disappear? It disappears when the light source is directly overhead. So Jacob Lieberman says it like this: a shadow is produced when an object blocks light. Whenever we block the light guiding our life, we create a shadow. Only when we are transparent and in alignment with the source of light, as when the sun is directly overhead, does the shadow magically disappear. So to me, that means that our shadow selves diminish and disappear when we are directly connected to divine source, when we are aligned. And we gotta remember that the thoughts that our shadow selves create, they're not based in spiritual truth. They're not. When you think that you're unworthy, you're denying the divine truth that you are a divine being, breathing the breath of God. When you think that you're less than, you're denying the divine truth that God is no respecter of persons. He gives to all alike. When you think that you're separate, you're denying the divine truth of oneness. And when you think you are broken, you're denying the divine truth of wholeness and completeness. So remembering our spiritual identity, the divine truth of ourselves, is very important in disempowering our shadow. You know, we're never going to be completely rid of these aspects of ourselves, but we can certainly reduce their power and their presence in our daily interactions, and we do that by walking toward the light of God. Murray Stein says it this way: the shadow is the image of ourselves that slides along behind us as we walk toward the light. I adore that image of myself walking toward the light with my shadow kind of extended out behind me, shrinking as I approach, having the light going directly over my head. So what a beautiful way of looking at it, right? So accepting and embracing our shadow aspects is our doorway to healing. Shadow work is nothing more than making the unconscious conscious, making the unacceptable acceptable. So doing healing work can be a lifelong part of the spiritual journey, shadow work. So let me talk a little bit about otters and octopuses. We had to look it up. How do you say plural octopus? And we thought octopi, and it's not. It's octopuses. Anyway, perhaps you've been in my office. If you've been in my office, you're going to see that I have 2 stuffed animals in my office, an otter and an octopus. And I've shared with a few of you, but I'm going to share with the rest of you what they mean. But first I want you to do an exercise. There's pen and paper everywhere. Get it, pick it up. On one side of the paper, I want you to write the word light at the top. And I want you to write 3 adjectives, 3 words that describe you at your very best. So when you're full of light and love, what words would describe you? So for example, for me, those words are loving, playful, and nurturing. That's who I am when I'm in my life. So I'll be quiet. 3 words. I could write more words like silly, affectionate, generous. What are your words that describe you when you're best, when you're at your best? Now I bet you can guess what the other side is for. On the other side of the paper, write the word shadow. And I want you to write 3 words or adjectives that describe you when you're in your shadow self, when you're hurt or angry or scared. So for me, those words are condescending, withdrawn, and sarcastic. What are yours? And if it doesn't come easily to you, it's okay. You're going to be taking the piece of paper home anyway. And now your homework is this, because you can't do this on the spot. Your homework is this. I invite you to think about what animals symbolize your light self and your shadow self. What animal behaves in the way you describe with your words? And what animal behaves with your 3 shadow aspects too? And it's not an easy assignment, actually. Something might pop into your mind right away, but more likely you're going to have to talk about it with some other people and perhaps look at a list of animals. If you were here for the animal wisdom class thing, we've got these little decks of animal cards. But look at a list of animals and see if you can find one that determines the best representation of these 2 sides of you. So many years ago, my friends John and Carrie challenged a group of us actually to figure this out, and so they challenged me to figure it out for myself, so that we could all support each other and recognize when we were kind of falling into our shadow selves. So I decided after much consideration that my light animal is an otter, funny and loving and playful and nurturing and affectionate and all of that, and my shadow self is an octopus. An octopus uses its intelligence as a weapon, right? It's condescending and sarcastic and withdrawn. And so the point is, if we can identify and understand our shadow selves, we can embrace them and work with them. We can more clearly know when they've been triggered and invite them to relax and move toward the light. Because here's the deal. There is within every otter a fierce side that protects its young and hunts and gets afraid. And there is within every octopus an affectionate and curious creature. I shared with you a few weeks ago that I love the documentary, My Octopus Teacher, because I was fascinated watching more symbology around my shadow self. I was able to see while I was watching that octopus that they are gorgeous creatures, right? They're cunning as predators and they can hide extremely well. But this octopus showed me that they are great at solving complex problems, and they have the ability to create and maintain relationships, which was shocking to me, and they were simply beautiful and mischievous, right? So I learned a lot about my shadow self by watching this documentary, because by using an animal to represent your light and another animal to represent your shadow, It helps you see and own all aspects of yourself with less judgment. Because animals behave in ways to help them adapt to the environment they're in. And that's what human beings are doing too, right? An octopus isn't bad or wrong when they retreat into their den. They're just defending themselves. And knowing that helps me understand that I'm not bad when I fall into my shadow self. I'm just responding from my ego in that moment, and I need to defend myself. And so once you identify your light and your shadow animals, I want to hear about them. So let me know. I would love a conversation about that. Come tell me whatever you come up with. It would be fun. But anyway, my point today is that we all have light and we all have darkness as a part of our wholeness. And understanding our spiritual identity is only light, and our human expression can either be light or dark. And when we have a better grasp on that, we can live from our highest self and our better self more often. So recognizing the shadow, we can kind of shift from that negative perception and look beyond appearance and seek alignment and remembering the spiritual truth of who we are. There was a meme on Facebook that said, be mindful of your shadow because you never know who's following it. Which is to say, you never know who is following you and watching you. And here's what I know. If people are following you, they notice your light and they notice your shadow too. You know, we're all human. We understand that we're all complex and complicated people, and we're a mixture of healed and unhealed, light and darkness, ego and spirit, right? And when we attempt to only show our light and we deny our shadow, we can get into trouble. We can get into trouble. And when you have someone else on a pedestal and you think they don't have a shadow self, you're going to get disappointed every time. So let me take an example, a very public example, and that is Tiger Woods, okay? So the world knew him to be this phenomenal golfer, amazing athlete that broke every record, this child prodigy that played golf better than anyone ever had before. And he had endorsements and campaigns and money that was flowing towards him because of his light, because of his talent. And he was the face of golf. He was a hero to so many people, adults and kids alike. His light was very, very bright. But many years into his career, the world suddenly became aware that Tiger Woods was actually a human being as well, and he had a shadow. You know, we learned that he wasn't perfect. And he had a life that was hidden from view. And he was judged mightily for that. He lost his endorsements, he lost a lot of the success that was expected in his career. We all know the story. If you don't, you can Google it and you can read a lot about it. But Tiger's journey did not stop there. It did not stop there. While none of us know the private parts of his life and his healing, we do know that he got help for his addictions. We know that he got help for some of his physical frailties and the pain that he was in. And we've watched him rebuild his relationships, and we're now watching him parent his children. And what I can only imagine is that Tiger learned to embrace his shadow. He learned what triggered his ego responses to pain and trauma. He learned that, and he made new choices. And we all watch as his life continued to unfold. I remember saying to a friend of mine back then, I'm like, why are you so surprised? Why are you so surprised? He's just a human being like everyone else. He has his challenges and his unhealed aspects just like we all do. Being a tremendous golfer does not mean that you are somehow superhuman, right? You know, he gets to have his private life and a great complication, just like we all do. So when you walk in the presence of others, you're going to become aware of their light and their shadow. When you love another fully, you're open to embracing and understanding their light, but also embracing and understanding their shadow. When you interact with someone's light, you know that it's simply their way of revealing their truth to you. And when you interact with someone's shadow, you know that it's simply their way of revealing their human pain to you. Learning to love ourselves is our greatest lesson in life. And there's no way we can fully love ourselves until we can recognize and embrace our shadows. Because we've got to remember, shadows do not have a life of their own. And they cannot operate independently from the object that creates it. Therefore, the only way to disempower the shadow is to move closer to the light. And if this topic is interesting you, there are so many books on the topic that you can read about doing shadow work and healing. And Jacob Lieberman is a great place to start. His works are amazing. But let's just remember for each other and for everyone in our lives that it's just me and my shadow, strolling down the avenue like they sang. And just the wisdom of Peter Pan and Tinkerbell taught us all. Light is all there is. A full life embraces the light and the shadow. So will you read our one sentence affirmation with me, please?
As I recognize my own shadow, I step closer to the light of my true identity.